Picture growing up in a world where your family's history isn't in the textbooks, where the pain, resilience, and quiet strength of immigrant life go unseen. Then imagine picking up a book that gets it. That doesn't just tell your story, it reflects your reality. Today's guest has spent her career writing those kinds of books, from the struggles of Japanese American families during internment to kids working hard alongside their parents in fields across the Midwest, to a war dog in Vietnam, showing us loyalty and loss. Her books center the voices of history that history often forgets. She's won Newbery Medal, the National Book Award, and opened doors for young readers to see themselves in literature, even when those stories are hard to tell. Please welcome Cynthia Kadohata.
Hi, Chris.
I hope I
Nice to
said that
finally
last name
chat
right.
with you. Yes, you did. Thank you. My eighth grade teacher always called me Kadohata. He called us all by our last names, and he'd be like, Kadohata,
Did you ever correct him?
huh?
Did you
Yeah,
ever correct him?
but there was another Japanese girl in a different class, and her name was Muram. What was her name? I forget, but he called me her too. Yeah, he got us.
Was there a book or moment from your childhood that made you want to become a writer? And do you think kids today still have access to the same kinds of stories, especially with book banning happening?
I would say there was no specific book. It was more maybe the life that I lived in a small town and just sort of, I always talk about seeing the stars at night and the Milky Way at night. And those are the things that I think kind of inspired me. Um, we didn't have a lot of books around the house. My mom did. But when I was growing up, I think kids have access to much more books. Even if a specific book is banned at a school or something, um, they the vast array of books available today is much greater than when I was young, for sure. I mean, we in high school, we read whatever was considered the classics, right? We read John Steinbeck or Nathaniel Hawthorne or, short stories by Guy de Maupassant, I think is his name, right? In grade school, we read White Fang by Jack London. We read The Call of the Wild. We read A Separate Peace in eighth grade. And so the books that are banned today would probably have been banned when I was not banned, but they just weren't there when I was a kid, right? We just read very different types of things. School was very, we were there to learn math and science, why is the sky blue and whatever. So we weren't really reading the kind of books that are read today about that are more I don't know, more maybe just exploring who you are. Like we weren't really concerned with that. We were more concerned when I was growing up with what is the world like, kind of, or what is the human condition, maybe, or so. Actually, no, I think kids have access to many more books today. I know that's probably not the answer you want to hear, but it's just, and I grew up in the 60s and we were quite free, and some of the kids were quite wild, but not really in school, I would say.
So you think right now, even though there is, book banning happening, kids have more access to books. Can you explain a little bit more on why?
Well, because the kind of books that are available today, they wouldn't really have been available when I was growing up. Like um, the only book that I remember reading when I was young that would have been even mildly that controversial, probably my friends moved down to Florida, and so my other friend and I flew down to Florida to visit with them. And their mom was extremely glamorous. She was the most glamorous parent. And she came home one day, and I think this was over spring vacation, and she brought us these two books that were bestsellers then. And one was called The Happy Hooker, and it was just kind of I think it was a autobiography by a prostitute. And then there was another one everything you always wanted to know about sex, which was a really big deal back then. But we wouldn't read stuff like that in school, right? It was just someone's mom would say, Here, read this. You girls should know this stuff. But in school, we didn't have a vast array of books available to us. We would read what we were sort of told to read, which would mostly be, John Steinbeck or whatever. So,
Kuro won the Newbery Medal and explores identity and family through a Japanese American lens. What inspired you to write it, and how do you hope it speaks to kids who don't always see themselves in books?
I do remember my sister had this book. It was called Japanese Fairy Tales, and it was really beautiful. It had beautiful illustrations. And that was the only book that any of us owned because I didn't even know bookstores existed. Like, I didn't know people bought books and had books in their home. We did go to the library, but I didn't know that you could just buy books at the store and read them. Like, I had no idea. We lived in a small town in Arkansas. And I think Kira Kira really just, it was kind of about growing up. And I had a dog, and her name was Sarah. And she was really sick that year. This was my first dog as a grown up. And I loved that dog incredibly. And in fact, she died. And so I remember that I had finished writing the book. And back then, we put it in envelopes and sent it through snail mail. And so I had the envelope on my desk and I was going to send it to my editor because I had finished the book. And my dog died. And I was just like, what? And I was just sobbing. And my boyfriend said, write down everything you're feeling, which he never says, things like that. And so I did. I started writing down everything I was feeling. And maybe a month later, I started putting some of that into the manuscript. And I sent my editor the manuscript with some of that. And so I think part of it, writing Kira Kira, it was really about just how much I loved that dog. My sister said, when my sister read it, she said, you killed me off because yeah, you're mad at me secretly or something like that. But it really wasn't. I loved that dog a lot. And I think a lot of the emotional content, I think a lot of it came from that. And some of it just came from, I think very hard life and, for sure than any of his kids did. And so sometimes I just want to write out of maybe respect for my dad. Like Weedflower, I would say is the same thing. Uh, I feel like I didn't appreciate him enough when he was alive. And so sometimes I just feel like, if he can see me somewhere, I want to show him that actually I really did appreciate him.
First, before I want to go on, I'm sorry for, your multiple losses. Do you think that these experiences has helped you become maybe a better writer?
Yes, I think you kind of want to experience maybe some emotional extremes, I suppose. Um, like you can't write, you have to live first and then you write. You can't write and then live in a sense.
Weedflower was inspired by your father's experience in a Japanese internment camp. How did your father's history shape the way that you told that story, and what message did you want to share?
So for me, like I said, it was just some of the kids really did not appreciate our dads enough. Like my dad's second wife told me once, she was telling me about this girl whose dad was a chicken sector. And she said whenever she saw him in the mall and she was with her friends, she would pretend she didn't know him because she was just embarrassed by her dad. And so I felt like we just didn't really get the lives that our dads had to lead. So yeah, so that it was just that. Like I got this email, a random email from someone I knew in the 1980s. And he mentioned in this email that I had talked to him about how hard my dad worked. And I was really glad to get that email because I thought I just didn't think about it ever back then, and that it was much later that I started thinking about it. So it made me happy to get that email and to see that maybe I was thinking about it back then.
What message would you like to share with Weedflower, though?
Um, I think all my books are sort of the same message, which is just no matter what happens, there's a path forward. And so for my dad, he dropped out of school very early. He had to work in the fields when he was 9, and he was picking celery or strawberries or whatever. And so he never really he never read a book. He never read any of my books. And I think he put his, I always say he put his life together with sticks and rocks and sand. And so there's always a path forward. And that's to me just the message of every book I write. You reach a low point and you experience maybe some of the extremes of what can go wrong, but you can still go forward and have a good life. For like one of the people I interviewed once was he was an atomic bomb survivor. And so he talks about how he was lying there. The atomic bomb had fallen, on Hiroshima. He got separated from his parents. He was injured and he was lying there and just thinking, I just want to die. There's nothing at all in my future. It's just total blank. Everything is destroyed. My parents are probably dead. And he said he was lying there and he saw the stars, and he never saw the stars because he had to work during the war. And it was inspirational to him. And he said, well, maybe I'll get up and look for my parents tomorrow. And he didn't find them the next day, but he found them eventually. And he had, kids, and they had kids, and they had kids. And I talked to him when I'm not sure, he may have been 90 by then. So he was very old. Um, but he had a good life. And so that's something I always mention to the kids. I show them before, pictures of the city before the bomb fell and after. And I just tell them, it doesn't matter what happens, there's a path forward.
In Cracker, you told a Vietnam War story through the eyes of a dog. What made you choose that point of view?
I love dogs. It's ridiculous how much I love dogs. I really love dogs. And so I just wanted to get inside their head, I guess. Um, I was reading this article the other day that I thought was really great. It was by a professor of English, and he says he teaches in college and he teaches lifers in a maximum security prison, and that they read differently. And so in college, they kind of read like, wow, that's terrible. They did that back then. And the prisoners read like, oh, they're in the mindset of the person living in the 1800s or whatever. And so I think that's the way I've always read, more like the prisoners. And um, so I want to be inside the mind of the character. And so I love dogs, and I wanted to be inside the head of a dog.
The Thing About Luck won the National Book Award and centers on a Japanese American family working through a difficult summer. What inspired this story, and what did you want readers to understand about work, family, and responsibility?
Um, that story was inspired. I was actually in Kansas to pick up an award for Cracker. And there were these, I think the girl who introduced me, her family were they worked in the wheat fields, and she's telling me about it. And I took the train there, and I remember sitting in the train station, and it was the middle of the night, and I was emailing my editor and saying, "Oh, here's something I'd really like to write about." And she didn't answer me, which she does quite often. Like I'll have an idea, and this is such a great idea, and she didn't answer me. And maybe a year later or 2 years later, she says, that was a good idea. Why don't you write about that?" And so it was kind of inspired by that, and just I like writing about hard work. I don't know. I don't know. That book did very well in China. It sells much better in China than in the United States. And I was reading, maybe some Chinese kids, they like to read about you work hard and then you get this and it works out, or whatever. And so I think I like writing about work for some reason. And again, the message is always the same. You reach a low point, you have a big challenge in your life, but you can work it out because you have what it takes inside of you to work it out.
Some of your books explore painful parts of American history. What do you say to people who think these stories shouldn't be taught in schools or made available to readers?
Um, yeah, I know there are people like that, and actually, they have the right to believe that. I kind of in my class, sometimes, we all knew each other and we all hung around. I found out later that the parents of one of my best friends, the mom was beaten up so badly by her dad that she was hospitalized. And I didn't know that at the time. And we didn't really read about things like that. And I don't know, I think they probably would have wanted to read about that because it's got to have been an incredibly awful and painful experience for them. But they couldn't even tell anybody because you didn't talk about those things back then. And so I just think it's helpful to kids, to get through the difficult parts of their lives.
But what would you say to these parents that are banning these books?
I mean, they have to make their own decisions about life, but I do think it's better for the kids to have some access to sort of the full array of human experience. Like maybe not every single thing because they are still kids. I think a lot about my friends whose mom was beaten up, and I'm still friends with them actually. And I think it would have been incredibly comforting to them in a lot of ways to see that, they're not alone and that terrible things happen in life. We don't want kids to think, oh my gosh, life is horrible. It's terrible. But terrible things happen. We can't stop that. I think it's fine for them to know that. I think it's good for them to know that and healthy for them to know that. And a lot of children's stories in the past, I mean, like even Hansel and Gretel pushing the witch into the oven or whatever, that's so incredibly violent. But it was just something that kids needed. Maybe it was cathartic or something. But I think it's good for kids. I think it's healthy for kids, and I think they need it. And I not just need it, they need it in a really visceral way.
From Kira Kira to Weedflower, from Cracker to the thing about luck. Cynthia doesn't just write about history, she writes about the people who lived through it. The ones who don't always make it to the spotlight, immigrant families, war survivors, kids doing the hard work of growing up in uncertain times. In a world where some would rather these stories stay hidden, her books say, "We were here." Cynthia, thank you for writing the truth with tenderness and deep respect for readers who deserve to see their lives reflected on the page.
Thanks, Chris. It was really nice to talk to you.
I loved all your answers.
Thanks, Chris.
Have a good day. Bye bye.
Bye.